I went and I sought out professional help. I had to go into therapy.
But that's a temporary feeling of relief.
The case unfolds amid growing public speculation that the defense team is gaining strategic advantage in a high-profile criminal trial, drawing sustained national attention. This perception emerges not from verdicts or rulings, but from selective courtroom moments circulating widely across social media and commentary-driven platforms. Observers focus on procedural developments rather than factual determinations of guilt or innocence, shaping early conclusions before the trial reaches resolution. Recent hearings introduce disputes over evidence handling, witness management, and judicial decisions that some interpret as setbacks for the prosecution. Legal analysts emphasize that these disputes occur routinely in complex trials and do not inherently signal collapse of the state's case. The defense strategy appears centered on identifying procedural vulnerabilities capable of undermining the trial's perceived fairness. Such vulnerabilities include questions surrounding admissibility of evidence and consistency in courtroom rulings. Public narratives begin framing these developments as momentum shifts, despite the absence of formal judicial findings supporting that conclusion. The concept of a mistrial enters public discussion as commentators speculate on potential outcomes tied to alleged procedural missteps. In legal practice, a mistrial represents an extraordinary remedy reserved for circumstances where fairness cannot be preserved. Courts apply a high threshold when considering such relief, weighing whether errors materially prejudice the defendant's right to a fair trial. Legal experts caution that tactical advantages do not equate to legal grounds sufficient for terminating proceedings. Despite these cautions, online discussion continues amplifying isolated moments as indicators of imminent dismissal or retrial. Media coverage often emphasizes reaction rather than context, reinforcing fragmented interpretations of courtroom events. This dynamic blurs the distinction between legal standards and public perception. Within the courtroom, proceedings continue under established rules governing evidence, jury conduct, and judicial discretion. Judges retain broad authority to correct errors without halting trials entirely. Appeals and mistrial motions are evaluated within structured legal frameworks rather than popular sentiment. Analysts stress that narrative coherence remains essential for the prosecution as proceedings advance. Defense efforts seek to disrupt that coherence by highlighting inconsistencies rather than disproving allegations outright. This approach reflects standard adversarial practice rather than unusual advantage. As the trial progresses, outcomes remain dependent on future rulings and judicial determinations. Early interpretations risk overstating significance before evidentiary presentation concludes. The opening phase illustrates how perception can diverge sharply from procedural reality. Understanding this divergence is critical to evaluating claims that one side is winning. Part 2 examines how online commentary reframes routine legal maneuvers as indicators of dominance within the trial. Short clips and selective summaries circulate rapidly, detached from the broader procedural context. These fragments are often interpreted as decisive moments rather than incremental steps. Legal analysts note that evidentiary objections and sidebar discussions occur frequently in contested trials. Such exchanges rarely signal structural weakness unless sustained and uncorrected. Public focus narrows on moments where judges question prosecutors or limit testimony. These moments are framed as judicial skepticism rather than neutral oversight. In practice, judges routinely test arguments to clarify scope and relevance. Defense teams capitalize on this visibility to reinforce narratives of momentum. Procedural delays and pauses are portrayed as losses for the state. However, delays often result from careful adherence to due process. Commentary frequently omits rulings that favor the prosecution. This selective emphasis distorts audience understanding. Legal standards governing mistrials remain largely absent from popular discussion. A mistrial requires showing incurable prejudice affecting fairness. Minor errors are typically addressed through instructions or evidentiary limits. Courts prefer corrective measures over termination of proceedings. Analysts emphasize that jury instructions serve as primary safeguards. Jurors are directed to disregard excluded evidence. Assumptions that jurors cannot follow instructions lack empirical support. Public narratives often underestimate judicial control of proceedings. Defense strategies seek to amplify doubt without meeting mistrial thresholds. Prosecutors adjust presentations to maintain coherence. The adversarial process continues within defined boundaries. Part 2 highlights the gap between courtroom mechanics and online interpretation. Part 3 focuses on the legal concept of mistrial and why it is frequently misunderstood in public discussion. A mistrial is not granted because one side appears more effective or persuasive at a given moment. Courts require a showing that an error has irreparably compromised the fairness of the proceedings. Judges first consider whether less severe remedies can cure potential prejudice. These remedies include striking testimony, limiting evidence, or issuing corrective jury instructions. Only when such measures are insufficient does a mistrial become a viable option. Commentary often conflates evidentiary disputes with constitutional violations. Legal experts emphasize that objections and exclusions are routine safeguards. The presence of disagreement does not imply judicial failure. Defense arguments highlighting procedural flaws must meet a high legal standard. Alleged errors are evaluated in context rather than isolation. Courts assess whether jurors can reasonably follow instructions to disregard improper material. Appellate precedent generally presumes juror compliance. This presumption limits the circumstances under which mistrials are declared. Public speculation frequently overlooks this foundational principle. Analysts caution against interpreting courtroom tension as evidence of impending collapse. The defense may seek mistrial motions strategically to preserve appellate issues. Such motions do not necessarily reflect confidence in immediate success. Prosecutors anticipate these tactics and structure cases accordingly. Trial judges maintain discretion to deny motions lacking sufficient basis. Rulings are typically accompanied by detailed legal reasoning. These explanations are often absent from abbreviated media summaries. Part 3 clarifies why perceived momentum rarely translates into mistrial outcomes. Understanding this distinction is essential for evaluating trial progress. The analysis moves next to the role of media amplification in shaping perception. Part 4 analyzes the role of media amplification in transforming procedural nuance into narratives of victory or collapse. Coverage often prioritizes immediacy and engagement over legal precision. Headlines and commentary compress complex rulings into simplified conclusions. This compression favors dramatic framing. Social platforms accelerate this effect through algorithmic promotion of controversy. Content emphasizing conflict gains visibility over contextual explanation. As a result, partial interpretations circulate more widely than complete records. Legal proceedings unfold over weeks or months, while commentary reacts within minutes. This temporal mismatch fuels misunderstanding. Observers form opinions based on incomplete snapshots. Media personalities speculate on outcomes without access to sealed filings or bench conferences. These speculative narratives shape public expectation. The defense benefits indirectly from this environment. Perceived momentum can influence discourse without affecting judicial analysis. Prosecutors face pressure to counter misinterpretation while maintaining courtroom focus. Judges remain insulated from media reaction by design. Their decisions rely on statutes and precedent rather than commentary. Nonetheless, public trust can be affected by persistent misrepresentation. Legal experts stress the importance of distinguishing reporting from advocacy. Responsible coverage contextualizes rulings within broader trial structure. Part 4 underscores how amplification reshapes perception without altering legal reality. The trial continues regardless of narrative framing. Outcomes depend on evidence and law, not online consensus. This section reframes momentum as a media construct. The analysis proceeds to evaluate strategic implications. Part 5 evaluates how both parties adapt strategy amid evolving public perception. Defense teams leverage procedural disputes to introduce doubt. These efforts aim to disrupt narrative cohesion rather than secure immediate termination. Prosecutors respond by tightening evidentiary presentation. Clarity and consistency become priorities. Witness preparation intensifies. Judges enforce time limits and evidentiary boundaries. Jury management remains central to maintaining fairness. Instructions are issued to mitigate exposure to external commentary. Courts presume jurors can compartmentalize information. Motions and objections serve as tools within structured advocacy. Each ruling shapes incremental advantage. Neither side gains decisive control through isolated decisions. Appeals are preserved through record creation. Strategic patience characterizes advanced litigation. Analysts caution against interpreting tactical positioning as outcome certainty. The trial remains dynamic. Developments are cumulative rather than decisive. Part 5 emphasizes adaptive strategy over perceived dominance. The process unfolds within established legal architecture. Part 6 addresses public misunderstanding of appellate remedies versus trial outcomes. Mistrials differ fundamentally from appeals. Appeals review completed records for legal error. Mistrials interrupt proceedings due to incurable prejudice. Confusion arises when commentary conflates these mechanisms. Defense discussions of mistrial may function as signaling. Such signaling preserves issues for later review. Judges assess claims under strict standards. Harmless error doctrine limits relief. Courts avoid drastic remedies absent necessity. Public discourse often overlooks this restraint. Analysts stress institutional preference for resolution. Trials are designed to reach verdicts. Premature termination undermines judicial economy. Part 6 clarifies why mistrials remain rare. Perception of inevitability contrasts with statistical reality. Legal outcomes follow precedent rather than speculation. Understanding this reduces misinterpretation. The analysis turns to concluding implications. Part 7 concludes by synthesizing procedural reality with public perception. Claims that one side is winning reflect narrative framing rather than legal determination. Trials progress through structured evaluation of evidence. Momentum exists primarily in commentary spaces. Judicial decisions remain grounded in law. Mistrials require extraordinary circumstances. Tactical disputes rarely meet that threshold. Media amplification magnifies uncertainty. Legal experts urge patience. Outcomes emerge at conclusion, not midpoint. The case remains ongoing. Resolution depends on rulings yet to come. Public understanding benefits from restraint. This narrative closes with emphasis on due process. Interpretation awaits judicial determination.